My name is Steve Blomefield. Um, my parents were originated in Britain. My mother came out to visit her brother and met my father, and she fell in love with him, and they got married. And my father had come from South Africa, and he was a tobacco, what's called a farm assistant. And he had been told by the tobacco owner, the farm owner, if you don't learn Chinyanja in 3 months, I'm going to beat you up. So by the end of the 3 months, he knew how to speak Chinyanja. And when he owned his own farm, he was great friends with them. When UDI came, he looked for a way of having a business which would feed his farm workers. And he ended up having a sculpture business. And his farm workers and local small-scale farmers, called communal farmers, they ended up being world-class artists. There was a local chief called Chimborere, and Chimborere said to him, Mr. Blomefield, you are on our land. And he was talking about the land which had been theirs for hundreds of years. So my father said, instead of saying, get out of here, this is my farm, I bought it. Instead of that, he said, well, seeing as this is your land, what do you want me to do? And they said to him, this is what we want you to do. If you find a pangolin, you've got to give it to me. You've got to give me 6 feet of black cloth. You've got to give me a ball of tobacco every year. And my father did that. And he was tremendously popular with the farm workers, not only of his farm, but in the whole district. And one day, Chimborere died. And my father decided to have a beer drink. Now this is unheard of. I mean, it's like the King of England, Charles, having a beer drink with the maid or something like that. I mean, it just didn't happen. It was unheard of. But my father was a man ahead of his time. He was 40 years ahead of his time. He was a remarkable man. I'm not saying this because he's my father, but you'll learn later how remarkable he was. So he decided to have a beer drink, and then a lot of farm workers and people came, chiefs came, the district administrator came, and everybody was drawn together in unity and love and happiness. And when the beer drink started, and he made a 44-gallon drum of Rapoko beer. And Rapoko beer is quite potent. It's rather like wine. It's brewed for 7 days, and they call it 7 day. So they were singing, they were dancing, they were drinking, they were eating one of my father's cows, and then suddenly a bolt of lightning came out of the sky and hit a tree nearby, and a huge branch fell off onto the ground. Nobody was touched. Everyone was safe. But then they said, Chimborere has seen it. And from that time on, my father and myself were called Chimborere. They would say to me, Chimborere, and I'd say yes, and because there was like a spiritual union, a spiritual affinity between my father. The district administrator said to his district administrators, this is the biggest unifying event that I've ever seen between the farmers and the workers and the small-scale farmers. And he couldn't stop praising my father. In this video, I'd like to talk about Rhodesia, and you might think, why did the Anglo-Saxons of Rhodesia, why did they take up arms? Why were they prepared to die? Some of them were maimed. Some of them were shot early in life, 17, 18. They were shot, machine gunned. Farmers died trying to protect their farms. Women were widowed. Why were we prepared for this? Why did we do it? It seems idiocy, nonsensical. Now, there was a reason for it, and it was a very good reason. The reason is this, is that when I was around about 8 or 10 years old, I heard about this thing called the Congo, the civil war in the Congo. And I heard about nuns being raped and butchered, people being butchered, indigenous Congolese being butchered, and civil war going on and blood flowing down the streets. And that told us that to be ruled by Africans was not a good idea. First of all, the country would have to feed itself by importing food. And this same thing was repeated in Kenya and Zambia, Mozambique. Then there'd be corruption, and then the infrastructure would degrade. Then there would be a problem with electricity, problem with water, problem on the roads, problem on telephones. And generally the whole country would just rot, like it was under some kind of a curse. So first of all, it was the Congo. I'm not sure when that was, the early 1960s. And then there was Kenya, the rebellion there. And a farmer would have a cook who is loyal and faithful and honest for 30 years. And then one night, the combatants would tell the cook to open the farm gate and open the door of the house. The combatants would go in and murder the farmer in his bed. They'd get hold of the dog. They'd crucify the dog on the gate. And then after that, what happened? Kenya imported food. The roads went to rack and ruin, etc., etc., etc. The corruption came in, and it was just a disaster. The same with Mozambique. Mozambique was independent around about 1975. And it was the same story there. Before independence, we would go to Mozambique, we'd go to Beira, we'd have a holiday there, we'd carry a caravan, we'd tow a caravan, and during the day we'd swim in the sea and suntan, we'd pick up mussels, we'd boil them in seawater, and we'd eat them. We would buy Portuguese bread, we would buy Portuguese vino. Those of you who are my age, you remember the vino in, I think it was 2 liter or 3 liter or 4 liter demijohns. Maybe it was 5 liter, a demijohn. And it would be very nice, drinkable wine. We prefer to drink the vino than the water. The water was not so good. And we'd go to a place called the Yacht Club in Beira, which was now called Little Rhodesia. And at night we would go out and we would eat Portuguese chicken, piri piri chicken. I'll never forget it. Honestly, it was the best chicken I've ever had in my life. We'd have prawns, we'd have crabs. We could go down to the market, we'd buy fresh crabs that are alive, swamp crabs. We'd take them home, we'd boil them, and we'd feast on them. There was nightlife for my father. He would go to a club called Moulin Rouge. I don't think he was naughty, but he would just enjoy the music, the European Portuguese-style music, the dancing, and that kind of stuff. And we'd come back late at night. And it was beautiful. It was fantastic until independence. After independence, we couldn't go there anymore. We were under sanctions from Mozambique. Before independence, Mozambique was growing cashew nuts. They had Cabora Bassa, which was supplying power to South Africa. And they had olives, and it was pretty well run. And And then after independence, everything went down. I remember in 1985, I went to Beira, and it was as though time stood still. The cars were parked. The bulldozers were parked. If you had a VW Beetle, it was a luxury car. And everything was rusting. Even the typewriters were rusted. And they would be still sitting on government desks, but unable to work. And that was after 1975. So from 1975, everything was just a crash. Samora Machel had told the Portuguese, after independence, I'm going to put you in re-education camps, according to Marxism. Your children are going to be sent to children's re-education camps. They're going to be educated with Marxist philosophy. So the weeks before independence, the Portuguese put the dog in the car. They emptied their bank accounts. They put the budgie in the car, the parrot in the car. All the money from the safe, they put it in the car. And they put maybe blankets in the car. And they would rush for the borders. And I met some of the Portuguese in South Africa who were refugees from Mozambique. And they said they literally thank God that they moved from Mozambique to South Africa. Because after 20 years of being in South Africa, they were now rich. They were wealthy, they had nice houses, they had security alarms, they had security guards, and everything was so good for them. And they look back at Mozambique and they see it as a disaster. Zambia, it was independent around about 1964. And I remember we had a radio from Zambia. And Kenneth Kaunda, he used to say, "One Zambia, one nation." And then everyone would say, "One nation." And then we in Rhodesia would say, "One railway station, one petrol station." And then we'd collapse with laughter. And, Kenneth Kaunda to us was just a joke. He had to import food, he had to import everything, even electricity. He had to import food, he had to import wine, he had to import. If you wanted anything fixed, you had to go down to Rhodesia to get it fixed. And then he would go on TV, and then he would cry out to the United Nations and the World Council of Churches to put sanctions on Rhodesia. And he had a handkerchief, and he would daub his eye like that. And we believed that he put lemon juice in this handkerchief. So whenever he did this, tears would come out. He'd go like that, go like that. Tears would flow down his cheeks. And then the cameraman would always be in a special situation so he could record the tears rolling down Kenneth Kaunda's cheeks. But of course, did he have majority rule? No. What he did, he told them, we're going to have an election, and then at the elections, you say whether you like the government or you don't like the government. And some wisecrack said, well, it doesn't matter who votes. What matters is who counts the votes. And of course, Kenneth Kaunda was always counting the votes, so of course, he would always be elected 98% approval for his government, even while the roads were rack and ruin, the electricity was rack and ruin, everything was just, the water was rack and ruin, everything was going to rack and ruin. And he was held as a hero by many people. At one point he closed the border, and after he closed the border, where was the food? How was the food going to get there? It couldn't. So his people suffered. His people really suffered. And there was one guy in Rhodesia who had an airline, and he used to fly to Lusaka and deliver to Kenneth Kaunda everything that he wanted, the bread, the biscuits, the wines, the supermarkets, food, and he made a lot of money supplying Kenneth Kaunda with food that was supposed to be under sanctions. So, it was just a joke. And Botswana was more well run. And there was a war in Angola. There was a civil war, which South Africa got involved with. And they were winning that war until America warned them to pull out. And then they did that. So all around us, we see Tanzania, all of these African countries. After independence, they stopped producing food. They started importing food. They imported food from Argentina and wheat from Russia and all over the place. So we in Rhodesia said, we can't have this happen. The idea of having an African rule, it was terrifying. And I mean that. Because we just thought corruption would come in, the infrastructure would degrade, there'd be no electricity, no water, food would be interrupted. And that's exactly what's happened in all of these countries. And so in order to prevent this, we were prepared to be called up for a year after we left school. We'd be trained in the army for a year. And I think it was about 3 months training and then in the bush for 9 months. And when we came out of the bush, we would work in the city. And then we'd be called up maybe once or twice a year to do 6 weeks in the bush. And then later on, it was even 6 weeks in, 6 weeks out. 6 weeks in the city, 6 weeks out. And it affected all the businesses, and wives were committing adultery. Husbands were getting shot, maimed, blown up by landmines. Why we were doing it is because we were terrified of an African government and the dictatorship that would follow that. And history has proven us right. However, I must say this at the end, that Zambia is improving, Mozambique is improving, Botswana is improving. I think that Angola might be improving. South Africa is going down, Zimbabwe is going down. So we've still got to read the bottom and climb up the other side. But I hope you can understand why now we were so stubborn, so intransigent, and we could not accept an African government. As I've said before, my father was very liberal, and he truly loved his farm workers and the people of Zimbabwe. And he was looking for a way of having a business which would feed his workers after sanctions. And he tried gemstones, of which Zimbabwe's got many. We've even got gold, silver, diamonds, sapphires. We've got emeralds and all kinds of semi-precious stones. So he did that for a while. He did the bees. But although he was successful, he didn't make money out of it. He didn't make a lot of money out of it. Then one day he made a clay head of Ian Smith, and he thought that he'd sell these like hotcakes to white Rhodesians. But although he was invited to go on RBC, Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation, and people liked them, nobody bought them. So that was a failure. So the gemstones were a failure. The bees were not so much a failure, but it wasn't really profitable. Then one day, a Shona man came to the farm and offered to teach him how to make sculpture. And he'd always wanted to be a sculptor. His mother was an artist, and I've even got one of her paintings here. And she was an artist. He wanted to be an artist, but never had the opportunity. And then when this guy said, "I want to teach you how to be a sculptor," he said, "Yes, I'd love you to teach me." So he bought some sculpting tools. On the farm, there was a black stone called serpentine. And this serpentine, they say black is beautiful, and definitely the stone was beautiful. On the outside, it was a pale brown, nondescript, useless looking, the stone which you would never want to buy or use. You might use it, to decorate the edge of your car park or something like that, but you'd never use it usefully. But he showed my father this black stone, and he said, you can use this black stone for sculpture. So my father prospected the mine, and pegged the mine, and began quarrying the stone and giving it for free to the artists. So very, very quickly, within 2 or 3 weeks, the cook said, the cook said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm making sculpture." And so Wazzy said, "What do you use sculpture for?" And my dad said, "Well, it's just for looking. People will buy it to look at it." Now, in Africa, everything you make, everything you sculpt, everything you carved is utilitarian. It's either a wooden spoon or a wooden plate or a wooden pillow or a spear or an arrow. Everything's got a purpose. So this was novel, this idea that people would actually buy a sculpture to put it on their mantelpiece and they'd look at it and get pleasure from that. So he said, "Well, can I join you?" And then the gardener said he wanted to join, and the tobacco supervisor, Bernard Matamera, wanted to join, and the vegetable gardener, Lemon Moses, he wanted to join. And soon it was more or less like Jesus and the disciples. You had the Shona guy teaching my father, and my father teaching everybody else. And then eventually the Shona guy left, leaving my father and the disciples to carve sculpture. And they took the sculpture to the National Gallery, and there was a guy called Frank McEwen there. And Frank McEwen said to my father, "Which art college did you go to?" Thinking he went to like Sorbonne University or something like that. My father said, "No, well, this guy came and taught us, and this is what I've got." And he made an owl, and he made a figure that as you turned the sculpture, as you turned it like that, it would transform from a swan into a human being and back again. It was a remarkable sculpture. And then he made one of a girl. I can't remember what the name of the girl was, but it was it was simple, and it was graceful, it was beautiful, it was a lovely piece. And Frank McEwen said, what art college did you go to? My father said, "No, man, this guy just came and showed us what to do, and we've been hacking away ever since then." And so Frank McEwen said, "Well, you are an artist from another world." And so from then, Frank McEwen began buying some sculpture from these, the cook and the gardener and the tobacco worker. We had another guy, Henry Munyaradze, who was a woodworker, carpenter. And Bernard Matamera became world-class artists. Was he? In fact, they all became world-class artists, and they all exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art in 1971. They exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is the best respected, honored art gallery in the world. And these guys, some of them didn't even have grade 1 education. Some of them had grade 3 education. They never knew anything about machine tools, carving tools. They just were given the tools and they started using them. And I have to give credit to the people of Africa. All of you guys who are watching this video, in your soul, there is a natural talent for languages and for art. Some of you write books. Some of you are actors. Some of you are dancers. Some of you are sculptors. in you is art. It's there. You just have to develop it. So I really respect the artists of Zimbabwe. When I go walking through the Tengenenge Art Gallery, I am literally humbled and shattered by the skill that these guys have got of making sculpture. Beautiful sculpture. Kind of like dream language sculpture. Wozi made a sculpture of a woodpecker, which at one angle is looking directly at you, and another angle is looking away. It's a humorous sculpture. And we had other artists who would make humorous sculptures. Amazing guys. And they've sold their art in galleries, Australia, America, England, Holland, all over the world. And people have bought these sculptures because they are truly amazing and they are world class. So my father continued he had started an art school, and many of the famous artists of Zimbabwe came from that art school. I forget their names now, but they are truly another group of world-class artists. In Zimbabwe, you can get any guy. Well, let's say you get 10 guys, okay? You teach them how to cut a base, how to use a chisel, a brick hammer, and how to use sandpaper, and how to polish them. And then after a month, they'll start to produce reasonable sculpture. In a year, most of them will become good sculptures. And then in 10 years, and in 5 years, at least 2 of them will become world-class artists. So that's the talent that we have in Africa, and I really respect it. We had farm workers. One guy, he was doing quarry work, Fanizania Kuda. He's a person who does humorous sculpture. And he's really a great guy. I think I'm not sure if he's still alive. He lives in Harare. Edward Chihuahua, he lives in Harare. Henry Munyurazi has passed away. Bernard Matamera has passed away. Josiah Manzi, a Malawian sculptor, he's passed away. A lot of these guys have passed away. Yeah, it's very sad. HIV is like a sickle going through the art community of Zimbabwe, cutting them down. But they've been replaced by other artists. So, yeah, he was able to start a business which included the farm workers. Some of them worked on the actual Tengenenge farm as tobacco laborers, and they would work from 6 a.m. to about 3 p.m. doing farm work, and then they would break, and then from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. they would do their sculpture. And in the days of Rhodesia, they would get about £9 a month at their farm work, and then they would get 30, 40, 50, £100 a month doing sculpture. So it was very good for them, and you could have a farm worker who owned a BMW car or a 10-ton truck right there in the farm worker village, which is called a compound. So in the compound you would have, this grass hut, Poland Dogger hut. Then you'd have one which had a BMW outside of it. It was bizarre, but it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I cannot talk highly enough about Zimbabwe artists. And if you're from outside of Zimbabwe, let's say you're from America or Britain or Europe or China, I would recommend to you that you come to Zimbabwe and you go to Tengenenge, which is in Guruve, and you buy some of the sculpture there. Take it home, exhibit it, and have your own little art gallery. I went to primary school at Rhodesia Primary School, and in those days, I don't know now, but in those days, it was one of the best schools in the country, the best primary school in the country. We had a guy called Brian Curtis. His name, we called him ABC because he was something like Andrew Brian Curtis, ABC. And he was a great guy. And he used to teach maths. He was a pilot in the Second World War, and he got shot down over Germany. And he was imprisoned in a German prisoner of war camp. And at his prisoner of war camp, there was this escape called the Great Escape, where a lot of people, I think 30 or 40 or 50 people, got into a tunnel, and they went under the fence and got out the other side, and they ran off, and some of them got back to England, some of them were shot dead, and some of them were captured and put back in the camp. So he was a lovely guy. And he, in the prisoner of war camp, he met this mathematician who had learned mathematics from some Indians. And they taught him various shortcuts, like how is a number divisible by 4 or 3 or 9, how to multiply by 11 in your head, and all kinds of tricks, which I've always used since then. On Sunday evenings, he would have us down for chess club. And I loved chess. Chess is my kind of game. And it's a game for thinkers. It's a game for people who like studying and learning. So that's really my kind of game. So we'd go down to his house on Sunday evening. We'd play each other, and he would coach us. Then an owl would fly into the room, which is his pet owl. It would click its beak, and then it would spread its wings and silently fly out. It was great fun. We had another guy called Mr. Lace. Mr. Lace was very, very ugly. He's one of the ugliest guys I've ever met. But there are certain things about him in which he excelled. For example, he used to lead the woodworking class. There was a woodworking class, and I made all kinds of things. One of the things I made was a sewing box for my mother, and she could put everything in there: her wool, needles, different colors, sewing threads, all kinds of things for sewing. And she used it for years and years and years. And then another guy he taught made a canoe. The canoe was about 3 meters long. It was made of wood and plywood, and it worked perfectly. So he was very, very good. And I've used, that knowledge from woodworking even until now. There's other thing he was known for, and that he had a instrument for beating boys' backsides, and we called it a ticka-licka. It was in the shape of a shoe. One time he actually carved his name on the ticka-licka. So it wasn't a cane; it was like a flat sole of a shoe. So he had his name engraved there. And when he beat you, the name would be written on your backside. So we had another guy called Archie. No, the men's teachers, most of them were single, and none of them were gay, and they were really men of men. So there was Archie, there was Mr. Lace, and there was Mr. Lambert. And these guys were very good teachers. Now Archie was, I think he taught geography. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong. It's a long time ago. But he used to take us for walks on a Sunday. And he used to take us to a certain kopje. And we'd run around the kopje, climbing rocks, playing, talking, chatting. And then he would blow a whistle, and we would gather at the base of these rocks. And then he would tell us a story. He would tell us a story about this ship which attacked this certain port, or a spy, and how he spied and how he was caught, or the invasion of France, or something like that. Very, very interesting stories. We loved them. I don't know about other people, but I especially loved them. And he was a tremendous guy. He died, and he's buried right now in the Rhodesia cemetery. Then there was another guy called Lambert. Lambert, he was very strong, and when he beat you, you would know all about it. You'd know about it, definitely. And on your backside, there would be a purple mark for each cane. And he had a selection of canes. Some were thinner and some were thicker. And when he beat you, he would first of all go to his collection of canes. And they were made from a kind of bamboo you find in Malaysia. And it was properly treated with, I think, olive oil and some other things. These were professional canes. Professional for doing what? Beating our backsides. And I hated being beaten. I remember lining outside Mr. Lace's room, and we had discussed who wanted to be first and who wanted to be last. I would say I wanted to be last, hoping that Chicken Little would be hit on the head by an acorn, and then Chicken Little wouldn't be able to get the cane out, the ticker liquor out, and beat my backside. But other guys were quite brave, and they said, no, I want to get it over with first. I want to go first. So we would sort ourselves out. Then he would call and say, next. Then he'd say, put your hands on the arms of this armchair. We'd do it. And then suddenly, whack! Oh, was it painful? Oh, was it painful? It was agony. And then, whack! Another one. He used to beat us normally twice. And we'd go outside of that room with our backside stinging in pain. Other guys would just walk outside like they just had an ice cream. Not me. I was a chicken. I would go out of that thing holding my backside and rubbing it to get the pain away. And Lambert was just as bad, if not worse, because he didn't have a flat ticker liquor. He had a cane. And when he beat you, it was no joke. I don't think anybody walked out of his thing as though it was an ice cream. This guy was strong, and he meant it. And one day I was supposed to get beaten, and I had some friends, John Ashburner, Brendan Fox, and a guy called Fenton, and a guy called Fleming, Charles Fleming, a wonderful guy. I love that guy so much. He was my best friend. And we gathered talking about what was about to come to us. And I don't know, I think it was Fenton. He said, Blummy, look, I was literally shaking with fear. And he said, look, Blummy, I can see you having a tough time about this. I'm going to go to Lambert and I'm going to ask him if he can beat me instead of you and let you off. And I said, oh, Fenton, please do that. I don't want to get beaten. I'm so sorry. I don't get beaten. Please, will you take my punishment for me? And he went to Lambert. Lambert said, the equivalent of, he did the crime, he's going to do, how does it go? Yeah, he did the crime, he's got to do the time. The equivalent of those in those days, which is in about 1965 or so, or 1966. He came back and he said, sorry, Blummy, you've got to go and you've got to take your punishment. So I went there, got my caning. I can't remember the pain because I've forgotten about it now. But I'll never forget what that guy did for me. And I'll never forget that. You know, he wanted to take my punishment for me. And that's something which, if I ever see him again, I'll remind him of that day. And yeah, another thing that would happen was we had a thing called the Polar Bear Club. In Marandera, it gets very, very cold. It can get maybe -1 degree centigrade, -2 degrees centigrade, maybe 5 degrees minus centigrade. And we had a Polar Bear Club. So in the middle of winter, at its coldest, those who wanted to be in the club would go down to the swimming pool. We would take off all our clothes, and we would swim one length. We'd get out the other side, dry ourselves, dress, and then we'd be given a polar bear certificate. And I had this certificate right until a couple of years ago. And then I lost it. So I was a member of the Polar Bear Club, and I would invite any other members of the Polar Bear Club to reach out to me and to say hi. You can find me on Facebook, and you can find me on YouTube as well. So that was Rhodesia. It was a great school. Once a year we'd have a a cricket match between the parents and the school. And we had a guy called Mike Proctor. I don't know if you remember him, but he was in the Rhodesian, in the Zimbabwe A team. And he's played international cricket for quite a while and helped us win many, many games, both in Rhodesia and in Zimbabwe. So he was a great guy. We also had, and I remember watching some of these parents. The ball would come thundering down the pitch, and they would whack that ball for a six. And that ball would sail like a satellite in the sky. It would land somewhere, and they would collect it and return it, and they would get the six. It was awe-inspiring. But some of the boys could also hit sixes, and sometimes they won, and sometimes the parents won. I think sometimes the parents were so keen on hitting that ball, they would swipe at it, they would miss, and they'd be bowled out, or the wicket keeper would catch the ball and stump them. So we had a number of sports. There was cricket, there was hockey, there was athletics, I think there was rugby. I'm not sure about the rugby. There was football, definitely football. And Mark McNulty was a golf player, and he was number one in the world at one stage. And he played for Zimbabwe, I think, Rhodesia or Zimbabwe. He was also subject to sanctions, and he was forbidden to play once or twice. Then after sanctions, after independence, I think he played for Zimbabwe for a couple of years. So that was Rhodesia, a great school. I think now it's girls and boys, and since my time they built a dam, and they do yachting as well. When you were Form 4, you were allowed to go out, have an outing in a group. So myself, Fenton, Fox, Ashburner, Fleming, we would go out and go to different koppies around, explore them, turn over rocks, see lizards and scorpions under those rocks. One time we turned over a rock and there was a brown house snake there, and we caught the snake. We didn't know if it was poisonous or not. We caught the snake, and we took it to the school, and there was a snake pit there, and we put the snake in the snake pit, and we were in the Natural History Club, and it was great. We had the best kind of like group with our snake, and we would catch lizards and feed it lizards. We'd have a great time. So Rhodesia was another paradise, very enjoyable, great teachers. Nobody was gay. The only thing is that Mr. Lace was an exception to the rule. And he, in 1965, all civil servants were required to sign a letter of loyalty to the Rhodesian government. Many did not, and he was one of them. He was very definitely a queen kind of person and royalty person. Sometimes he used to talk about the queen and about the royalty. And Queen Elizabeth was the queen at that time. And he used to talk about her and reminisce. So after 1965, he refused to sign that, and so he went back to Britain, and I'm sure he was a school teacher there. Hi, I just want to tell you about what it was like at a Rhodesian high school. Now, there were some high schools which were in the bush, like Plumtree and Falcon and Sonoya. And Sonoya was the school that I went to. Now, the school I went to, Sonoya, was 90 miles away from our farm in Grove. So when we went there, we knew that we were going to be there for a long time, at least 1.5 months, and then there would be a break for maybe 4 or 5 days, and then there would be, we'd go back to school. So during that break, we'd go home and then come back to school, and then that was what was called half term. So, it was, what I loved about Sonoya was, number one, we had very good teachers. We had top of the range teachers, very, very good teachers, the kind of teachers you get at private schools nowadays. And so they would teach us during the day. What would happen, we'd wake up at about 6:30, bath, and then we would change into our clothes. We'd go down for breakfast. From breakfast, we'd go to school. Around about 10 o'clock, there would be break. We'd have 30 minutes break, go back to school until, I think, 12:30. We'd go to the hostel. We'd have lunch there. There was about maybe, let me think, 2, 4, 6, 8 people at a table. And in those days, where the food was reasonable. But there was one time when we had, I've forgotten the name, but it smelled like vomit and it looked like vomit. And yeah, it was called Welsh rabbit. And I don't know why they call it rabbit, but those of you from Wales know why it was called that. And one time it was not made properly, and it smelled of vomit, and it looked like vomit, and it almost tasted like vomit. And nobody would eat it. So we didn't declare officially a hunger strike. We just said, we can't eat this. And so some of those teachers, some of those seniors went down all of the tables and said, guys, we're not eating this food. It smells like vomit. And so no one ate the food, and they sent all the food back to the kitchen, which was more or less like a mutiny on the bounty. It was absolutely heresy. So they found out who the ringleaders were, and they were taken to Mr. Fincham's rooms. They were beaten 6 of the best. But we never had that again. But generally the food was pretty good. Stew every day. It was well cooked. We had rice and stew, sometimes mashed potato. Then on Fridays, because Fincham was a Catholic, we always had fish on Friday. But it was reasonable. It was nice. So I had no complaints about the food. I don't know about nowadays. I think nowadays you probably have maize meal and vegetable they call muriwo or chimolia. And then maybe once a week or twice a week you would get some kind of a meat dish. So yeah, for breakfast, I can't remember what we had for breakfast, but I think it was something like bacon and eggs and toast. Yeah, I think we had and toast and jam. It might be marmalade, it might be jam. So we lived as though we were at a private school, but we had this one Indian guy, and he was from, not Indian proper, but he was part of a Portuguese colony on the Indian continent. And his name was Fuller. And he convinced us that he was white. In fact, he wasn't. He was absolutely Indian with a brown skin and black hair. So because he fooled us that he was white, we believed him. And, it was normal, like playing with a white guy, But in South Africa, he wouldn't have got away with it. They would have said to him, you've got the Indian skin and the Indian hair, go to an Indian school. So, there were some funny things that went on in that school. So in the afternoons, I hated sport. I hated rugby. I hated cricket. I hated hockey. I hated athletics. One and all, I hated them. So in the first term, I would say to the cricket guy, I was doing athletics, and the athletics guy, I would tell him I'm doing cricket. In the mid-year, I'd say to the one guy, I'm doing hockey, and to the hockey guy, I'd say I'm doing rugby. So I would then sneak out of the school grounds, climb over the fence, and go into the bush to collect eggs. And very often, there would be a fire, and there would be carbonized trees and burnt grass, and I'd be walking through this. I'd get charcoal all over my legs, my hands, my clothes, my face, my hair. And when I got back to school, I'd have to I'd have to sneak around, making sure I wasn't caught by one of the teachers. And then I'd go and I'd have a bath or a shower. Or if there was no water, I'd just wash myself. So I had a lot of fun climbing trees, collecting birds' eggs. On Fletcher's farm, there was a long-crested eagle nest, and they're quite rare. So I was scared. The tree was too high. So what did I do? Being a senior, I went and got a junior, and I told him to climb the tree. And he climbed the tree, and he told me there was no eggs in there. So I told him to climb down. And then a week later, I went to the same tree to climb it myself. And then I found that there was a guy with a shotgun guarding the tree. So Fletcher had found out that schoolboys were trying to get the eggs. So he guarded the nest 24 hours a day. When I saw the shotgun guy, he stood up with his shotgun and like that. And I saw him and I ran for my life all the way back to school. And then the next day at the announcements we heard that some schoolboys are running out of the school and they are visiting a long-crested eagle nest. If we catch you, we will beat you 6 times on your bum and we will punish you so much that you will regret the day that you were born. And so nobody knew that it was me, except for the junior and myself. So privately we laughed like hell. So we would get up to all kinds of tricks. I would, at night, we used to climb down. There were 2 ways of getting out of the hostel. One was to the front door, which was just plain boring. And the other one was climbing down a drain pipe. So we would climb on the windowsill. We'd then reach out to the drain pipe, hold the drain pipe, and I would wedge my foot between the drain pipe and the wall of the hostel. So this was, about maybe 10, 15 meters from the ground, and then slowly climb down. There was one guy called Gooch, and when he climbed down, he made a hang of a racket. And Fincham, the superintendent of the hostel, he came and he waited at the bottom for Gooch to climb down. And then he said, "Gooch, what are you doing?" And Gooch said, "Sir, I'm looking for my pencil. I can't find my pencil, sir. Can you help me find my pencil, sir? Because I've got to go to class now." And he pretended to be sleepwalking. And Fincham believed him. So he guided Gooch back to his bedroom, his dormitory, and then Gooch waited another hour, and then climbed down again and went to town to have coffee with a day scholar. So at night I'd walk around the school premises, just hanging around, walking around, enjoying myself. And then sometimes I'd climb up into the school, onto the school roof, and go to the school hall, myself and a friend. And he would sit on my feet, and I would lean right over and look at the different birds' nests. There were swift nests. And I would examine those swift nests that had eggs, and they were incubating for some time. They had babies in them, and I would look for those which were fresh eggs, and I would collect them and then go back to school and back to the dormitory. So we had all kinds of things going on, and I would go to Fletcher's farm and I'd jump over his fence and steal oranges, and then I would proceed on my way and look for eagles' nests. When you climb up an eagle's nest, it was no joke. It was actually very dangerous. And I was scared of heights, so my knees would be knocking. And then this eagle would be flying it would be dive bombing like this and screaming. Mainly Wahlberg's nests, and then there was a few others as well. But there was one particular tree. It had no branches, but every meter or so there were like a knobby thing would be sticking out of the tree, and I would grab on those knobby things, climb up. I eventually reached the nest, and then I would put the egg inside half of a cricket ball and lower it to the ground. Then I would climb down. Meanwhile, there's this female eagle swooping down at me, close to me, and it never hit me. But if it had hit me with its wing, I'm sure I would have fallen off and badly injured myself. So, we were very rebellious. I would go into the staff room where there was fruit and there was often peanuts, and I'd fill my pocket with peanuts and put a fruit in the other pocket. And we had, the superintendent was a guy called Fincham, and he had a long nose, so we called him Snout, we called him Honk, and he was wide awake. If I didn't smoke, but if you were smoking, he would walk by you and he would be sniffing you, and he would sniff the cigarette smoke on you. Then he would say to you, "Bring your hand, give me your hand." You smell your hand, and you'd smell the cigarettes on it. He would take you immediately to his room and he would beat you. Concerning the beatings, yes, I'd get maybe 2 or 3 beatings a term. Once I got four of the best. I can't remember what for. And but I was always doing some kind of infraction, and then I'd be getting 2. It was very unpleasant. It was very sore. They would tell you to bend over, and then he would beat you. One of the schoolboys, he decided that he was going to put on 3 pairs of underpants. So Fincham beat him, and he didn't catch on that the guy had 3 pairs of underpants on. So the guy hardly felt anything, and he just walked out like it was a bright and sunny day. As for me, I didn't have the guts to do that. So even though I was naughty, and I was always breaking the rules, I did not enjoy being beaten. I would try everything to not be caught. So our team, Sonoya High, when I was in Form 6, it was the best team in the country, and we beat everybody. We beat Churchill, we beat Marandera, we beat all the teams. We were number 1 in the school, and it was basically because some of the best rugby players were not intelligent guys. I won't tell you their names, but they were pretty empty up here. So when it come to the O levels, they would have to repeat, and they'd be on a school for doing O levels for maybe 3 years before they finally passed the last exam. So as a result, we had seasoned rugby players, and we had a very good scrum. The guys in the scrum were pretty heavy, so we beat all the schools. And we had our school anthem was who are we? We are, can't you see? We are SHS. So we're very proud of our school rugby anthem, or whatever you call it. So that was the school. It was an Afrikaner school mainly. Once some Afrikaners went from South Africa, they went to Mangula, and then from Mangula they went to Sonoya. They bought farms in Sonoya. They went farms in Lions Den. So all of that whole area was Afrikaners. Their children were coming to school. So the language spoken at the school was Afrikaans, even though the teaching medium was English. So it was a very good school, but I was bullied. I was bullied like crazy. Sometimes the seniors would tell the juniors to run down between two sections of seniors, and they would have a lamp. They'd roll their towels into what's called a lamb's tail, and it was like a whip. and they would tell you to run down this corridor. They would trip you up, they would beat you on the ground, they would whip you with these lamb's tails, and then once you reached the end, you'd have to come back. And I don't know, by the grace of God, it never happened to me. We endured it, and when we left the school, one of the guys took his anglia, and he rode all over the flower beds of the school and wheelied in the flower beds and really made a mess of them. And another schoolboy who was quite well built, on the last day of school, he went to Fincham and he knocked on Fincham's door. Fincham came out and he punched him. Wow! So it wasn't easy being a teacher, and it wasn't easy being a student at a Rhodesian school. Thank you. Now we come to the actual war, called by some the Rhodesian Bush War, some the Chimurenga War. In 1975, I was called up and I went for training. I was the third intake of Internal Affairs National Service called IANS, IANS.